Good morning, all. It does look like we have a quorum, but we are still missing two of our subtac members. So maybe we'll give it another minute or two before we start. Okay, so we will start shortly. All right, we have four. Secretary Manis, did you hear back from Sonoma Water? See if we have a South Park rep today.
I did not hear from Sonoma Water, although I did see a meeting forwarded to Emma Watson. So I don't know if she's stepping in on behalf of Michael Thompson.
Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started then, since we have 4 out of the 5. So we will call the meeting to order 8:02. And if let's see, just a reminder that if you can stay on camera, that would be great. And Secretary Manis, can we do, if you're a subtac member or presenting, and Secretary Manis, can we do a roll call, please?
Thank you. City of Santa Rosa.
Jennifer Brooks, Santa Rosa Water here.
City of Cotati.
Craig Scott, City of Cotati here.
Thank you. City of Roanoke Park.
Vanessa Garrett, City of Roanoke Park here.
Thank you. City of Sebastopol.
Ryan Crawford for the City of Sebastopol here.
Thank you. And I'm just now promoting Michael Thompson from Sonoma Water. So Michael, once you get your mic and camera on, we're on roll call. Are you present?
And South Park is present.
Thank you. Let the record show all subcommittee or subtac members are present.
Great, thank you very much. So we will move to item number 2. As you may recall, there are still opportunities until at least through this month to make special findings based on AB 361 to meet virtually. So you do have a resolution in front of you. I do want to remind the subtac that the anticipation is that the governor will be rescinding the health emergency at the end of this month. And then we have very limited options for virtual meetings, and logistically, we do not have that at the plant. So we will be returning to in-person meetings should the health emergency be rescinded by the governor starting next month. So any questions or comments from committee members? Okay, before we get a motion, we will open it up for public comment. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
I'm seeing no hands be raised via Zoom.
Okay, so before the subtac, if someone would like to make a motion in a second.
Craig Scott, the City of Cotati, I move to approve.
I can second that.
All right, so we have a motion from Cotati and a second from Roanoke Park. And Secretary Manis, can you please do a roll call vote for this item?
Thank you. Sonoma Water.
Aye.
City of Sebastopol.
Aye.
City of Roanoke Park.
Yes.
City of Cotati.
Craig Scott, Cotati, yes.
Thank you. City of Santa Rosa.
Jennifer Burke, Santa Rosa Water, aye.
That motion passes with 5 affirmative votes.
Great, thank you very much. We will now move on to the minutes from October 13th. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll look to accept the minutes, but before we do, we'll take public comments. If you have any public comment on this item, please raise your hand via Zoom. If you're on the phone, please dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
Chair Burke, we do not.
Okay, so we will consider the minutes approved. And then we will now take public comments. We're on item 4. This is a time to provide any comments on items that are not on the agenda. And if you are on Zoom, please raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not.
Great, thank you all. Okay, we'll move to new business for this meeting. So item 5.1 is a presentation on our fiscal year 23-24 preliminary budget. And Nick Harvey, the budget and financial analysis manager, analysis manager, will be making the presentation. Nick.
Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Director Burke mentioned, I'll be going over our preliminary budget look at the regional operation as well as budget timing. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen set up here. And can everybody see the slide okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So today I'm going to be going over preliminary anticipated increases to the regional budget, a quick review of annual flows for fiscal year 21-22, and some revenue assumptions, and finally schedule for our budget. So here's a quick look at our preliminary anticipated increases. These are just the ones we're aware of at this point. We're still very much in the process of gathering all our budget information, and we'll have more information on increases as we move along in the process. For salary increases, we're moving into the last year of our currently adopted MOUs, and we have a 2.5% COLA being implemented July 1st of 2023. We're also seeing a continued increase in the cost of chemicals and PG&E rates. Not quite sure where those are going to land, so we'll be keeping a close eye on those going forward. Our O&M projects are a big investment ongoing, in particular funding for our MPDES permitting. And we have one additional staff member, that being a wastewater operator supervisor planned for fiscal year 23-24. Okay, here's a look at the flows from 21-22, and as you all know or are familiar with, that we use the actual flow amounts into the plant from the previous full fiscal year to budget O&M costs for the following year. And so the percentages are really in the same place relative to where they were last year, with the biggest change being that Santa Rosa's share of flows increased by 1% over the 2021 numbers, with the result reflecting a small decrease in allocation for the other 4 partner agencies. So I've completed programming the miscellaneous.
Nick, could you please go back to that other slide, please?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to look at it for a little bit longer. So it looks like all the flows went up. If I'm seeing that across the board, Santa Rosa just went up more than others.
Right. So since Santa Rosa consumed 1% more of the overall flows for last year, all of our partner agencies are seeing a slight decrease percentage wise.
And I'm just curious, do you think weather related, or is it, and maybe this isn't a question, and I don't want to get off on that, sorry, but I'm assuming it's weather and pandemic recovery related, but I was just curious.
You know, we could look into that for you. I'm just not comfortable answering that question.
of
I'd
course.
prefer somebody with operational experience to
Yeah.
address that one.
Of course. So thank you.
Yeah. Here's the preliminary look at the miscellaneous revenues that we've programmed for the year. The largest projected increase is coming from the high strength waste tipping charges, this line item here. We're expecting to see continued high demand, and that in conjunction with planned escalation in tipping fees for next year. We're expecting to bring in quite a bit of money. Another reason we're planning for an increase is we had to shut down the operation temporarily this year as a result of the atmospheric rivers. And we don't expect that in a typical year. So we're assuming that won't be the case next year. And this line item here, dairy waste loan payments, we're no longer expecting any further revenues in that program going forward, as I confirmed with finance that all the dairy waste loans have been extinguished as of June 30th, 2022. And so as you can see, we're relatively flat year to year. And this is just a quick reminder of what each agency's final allocations were from 22-23, so the year we're currently in. And here are the amounts of fund balance that were chosen by Roanoke Park and Sebastopol respectively to be applied against their allocations for the current year. So here's a quick look at our refund reserve balance. And this is where the bottom line is where our reserves sit for each agency respectively. And so as we work through budget, you can refer to these amounts for your agency and start thinking about how you may want to apply those reserves for the 23-24 budget cycle. As a reminder, this large 12.8 million coming out of Santa Rosa's reserve balance is because we moved that back to our wastewater fund after deciding to not cash fund any of the UV project. So we'd initially thought we'd put a big chunk of cash towards the project, but the bond rates were so advantageous at the time of the 2020 issuance that we decided to bond fund it 100%. And so
Nick, that last slide, is that the ending fund balance or is that the change in fund balance?
That is the ending refund reserve balance. The other corollary I'll give you to this is that these balances will change slightly as a result of the refund reserve, the operational refund calculation that finance does each year. And that's typically performed sometime between now and April by our finance department, so that we have the latest information to consider when we're determining the final allocations that we take to council in April before the rest of the budget, so that we can provide you all with your user agency allocations by May 1st of each year. So these will change slightly depending on the finance calculation, but we'll keep you updated on where those balances sit as we move through the process.
And so if you can just help me understand, so at the end of last year, Santa Rosa had a negative $12 million. You just described it. Maybe I need to hear it again, but there were several that had a negative reserve fund balance. And what does that mean?
Well, what it means is that Cotati, so if you remember, there was a change in the flows based on the actual metering. And so what that means is hopefully, while Cotati is sitting in a negative reserve balance, hopefully we have enough of a refund within the next year or two to where that negative balance can be absorbed and get back into the positive as we move forward.
So Nick, if I might just to help clarify, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mike, you want to look at the totals line? That is the fund balance. So that every year shows what was either added or reduced, but the total is what is available to each partner agency, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer, because that makes more sense. And then again, so it's looking like Santa Rosa is going in with a negative $12 million.
No, the total line.
Total. Oh, at the bottom. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So we have 4.7 in Santa Rosa, Everyone
Understood.
has a positive fund balance except for Katati.
Katati. Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Correct.
That really answered my question. Yeah, because that's why I was asking if the main numbers in the box were the change in balance, and the bottom then is the actual ending fund balance.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry
thank
for any
you.
lack of clarity on that.
No, it's okay. I just, it just really helps understand. Thanks for the explanation.
And it looks like Craig has a question. Maybe go back to that slide, please, Nick.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, just some more clarity on what that final reconciliation, or that time you said there was an adjustment and these are going to change slightly. Is that basically saying, hey, we've still made an assumption for the last complete year going forward, and then now that we have the numbers, we can see what kind of a difference there was? Just what's that last change reconciliation you're making? Is that what that is just seeing how we did with the projection versus what actually happened?
Yes, and so in a sense, what these represent is budget to actual. So each year we prepare a budget, and really the budgetary numbers are our universal set of assumptions. And then at the end of the year, we look at, or finance looks at, the total budget versus what was actually spent, and then they calculate a turn back figure, i.e. the amount of budget that wasn't spent, and then that goes back into our refund reserve. And so it's a pretty complicated calculation, but this account pretty much summarizes the cumulative total over all the years of our budget to actual. And so in a typical year, we're adding to these balances, but due to the flow calculation change, Kotati went negative for a bit, but we're hoping going forward that we're only adding to this balance and only subtracting in terms of when agencies decide to apply some of that balance to smooth their rate impacts.
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I understand that. It was the turn back calculation. It looks like we're making progress.
Absolutely.
That's a huge hit for us to do that. But we're steadily getting there.
Yeah, and as I said, sometime between now and April, by the time we go to council to formally issue the partner allocations, we'll be getting those numbers from finance, and we can keep you all updated. All right, any further questions? Okay.
I
Oh,
do
looks
have
like we
one.
a question
Yeah.
from Vanessa.
Yeah.
Just mechanically, so since we have a fund balance here, if we are doing a rate study currently, and if we were going to incorporate that into our rate study, it looks like Santa Rosa took all of this at once, and did you put it back into an account, or do you have to just request a certain amount to be paid off each month?
So yes, we did take it back into our account. In the context of Santa Rosa Water, what that means is that the regional or sub-regional enterprise is its own enterprise, but it's really a subsidiary of the overall sewer operations for the city of Santa Rosa. And so what we use to pay for our agency allocations towards the plant operations is our local wastewater fund. And so we transferred each year our allocation out of the local wastewater fund. And so we got to a point where we had a large accumulated balance here available, which represents our portion of the refund reserve. And so when we got to a point where we realized we weren't going to be leveraging that cash balance against the UV disinfection replacement project, we simply decided, rather than letting the money sit here, that we would take that back to our local operations fund. And so that amount only has an impact on the city of Santa Rosa and Santa Rosa Water. It's not taking away from any of the other partner agencies.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was just curious if Roner Park can do the same thing if we were going to take that in for a CIP project potentially and use our fund balance.
Yes, that 2.8 million is Roner Parks to do with as you choose. You do have that that ability if that's what they were to choose. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
And just a little history, if I might. So prior to setting up this refund reserve, we used to issue the amount left over back to the partners every year. So it was just a bunch of swapping money. That didn't make a lot of sense. And so this is here. And as Nick mentioned, it is available to each partner to use as they choose. But we do recommend keeping some in here because it's going to help a lot with rate smoothing. You'll see further in this presentation that Roanoke Park applied a bit of your refund reserve to last year's rates to help make them be a little less of an increase. And so just consider that as well. We don't know, you know, as Nick mentioned in the first slide, we have a number of things that look to be increasing this year. And so we're not entirely sure what the rates are going to look like. So this will help with rate smoothing as well.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
Okay, and as you all might recall, Deputy Director Zunino and myself have been working with Santa Rosa Water's rate consultant to develop a more specific rate model to the regional operations. So we've been working on that, and we're going to show you a little bit of it. And this is just a list of the assumptions that we built into that. So labor, as we discussed in an earlier slide, we're expecting a 2.5% bump in 23-24 and 5% thereafter. We're reflecting the one additional FTE. We're not assuming any future FTEs in the model, although those will likely be needed. We're continuing our $1 million per year cash funded capital program investment increase. As we have for several years. Electricity, chemicals, and MPDES permit are going up according to these numbers. Another important thing to point out is that we're not including any future debt service issuances, although they will likely be needed for upcoming infrastructure needs at the plant. And for the purposes of the model, these are the agency flows that we've assumed.
Got a quick question there.
Yeah.
Nick.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't get my hand up digitally fast enough on that one. Can you clarify that the MPDS permit's going up by $500,000 in a year? Is that what you said?
No.
Okay.
No, sorry. So the MPDES permit, the way the spending happens on that, my understanding from talking to our staff out at the plant is that we do experience spikes in expenditures from time to time. It really depends on, you know, when we discharge and how much. But really what we're doing programmatically in the budget is rather than running the balance down and then going out for $1 million, $1.5 million in 1 year in funding, what we've done is we're on a plan of funding it at about $500,000 annually to smooth that budgetary impact. And so, you know, every couple of years we're building the balance and then spending it down, and then theoretically we're continuing this yearly investment. And so that's really it's really us smoothing this budgetary impact rather than causing spikes in the model unnecessarily.
Great, thank you. I remember that. I just thought you'd said it was going up by an additional $500,000 this year. But
oh,
okay,
sorry, not an additional, just the same 500.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll also just note, we have our report of waste discharge coming up and permit negotiations. So we have to start planning for that. Looks like we have Vanessa with her hand up, and then we'll go to Craig.
Thanks. Oh yeah, that was one of my questions. And then I just was curious on the cash funded capital program. It sounds like you plan for an additional $1 million per year. Is that based on like a 5-year or 10-year CIP program, or how is that number generated?
It's my understanding that several years ago, before my time with Santa Rosa Water, that this body came to the unanimous conclusion that we were underinvesting in capital. And so the agreement was made a number of years ago to increase our investment by $1 million per year every year. And we've done that for several years now. And so that's a continuing assumption that we're using for financial planning resources, especially in particular to this model. I don't know if anyone else would like to speak to that.
Sure, I can add a little bit. So Nick is correct. It was not based on funding need. It was based on how best we could start to build up a CIP, because we had $1 million cash CIP for a $500 million treatment plant value. So we have since done a master plan for our sub-regional system. And we do bring those capital projects. We brought them forward to SubTAC last year, and we'll continue to update that. The funding need is greater than what we're investing by far, but we are still just building it up by $1 million a year to try and make that as easy on us from a rate perspective to start to continue to build that cash amount until we get to where we need.
Okay.
Yeah, and just a little bit more on that. I think are we close to 10 years on it now? That I don't know whatever the amount is where you can tell, but whatever the amount is how many years we've been doing it.
I think we're at 9 because we'll be at 10 million this year, and we had
Yeah.
at 1.
The idea though was that you should, like, a system should be funding itself, at least doing cash funding at least to the level of depreciation, of annual depreciation. And as I recall, Santa Rosa's depreciation was still is running in the $15 to $20 million range. And so each year, if you're not reinvesting that amount, you're essentially mining or borrowing from your infrastructure. And so that was really the idea, just as it really is similar to what Jennifer said, but that problem was realized that, $1 million a year just isn't enough for ongoing capital replacement, as Jennifer said, with a system this size. So the goal, I think the first goal has been to get that up to the rate of depreciation. And then once it's reached that point, future tax can decide whether they want to go further, but that had been the intent.
Oh, so I see. It's an additional million, not just 1 million a year. Okay.
No.
That seemed very low. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So looking at the flow allocation, these are the assumed flows allocation for the 23-24 budget, and then we were shown a flow allocation for the last complete year, where you had mentioned that Santa Rosa's flow kind of jumped up and it resulted in a reduction. So
Yes.
these are different than that flow allocation. So can you speak to how this flow allocation was derived?
Yes. So in terms of long-term financial modeling, which is what this tool is meant to achieve, we never want to use a snapshot in time. And so while we're using the actual 21-22 flows for the 23-24 O&M allocations, it's not necessarily that 1 year result isn't necessarily indicative of what we expect to see for the indefinite future. So our rate consultant and we have used some kind of average flows. So there's been some smoothing. I can't speak to exactly what that assumption is. I can look into that in terms of the model, but there's some sort of averaging going on rather than just taking a snapshot in time and making that the broad-based assumption looking forward.
Yeah, I'd like if you could provide that additional methodology, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
I can do that. Thank you.
I do think, Nick and Craig, we do have Deputy Director Kimberly Zanino on. She might be able to reflect a little bit more on this. So Secretary Manis, if you could promote Deputy Director Zanino so she could talk on this item, that would be great.
Good morning, everyone. So just on this specific piece, we are using just average flows for each one of the partners, because this assumption here, Craig, or sorry, member Scott, TAC member Scott, is really for just the model. So it's not being used for any of how we will determine what your allocation of the budget is. We'll continue to use those allocations or continue to set those allocations based on that previous year's actual flow. But if we want to look 10 years out, we need to figure out, what numbers we're going to use to do that 10-year look so that we can actually give you some numbers. And so what we did is we just took an average of several years to figure out what flows we should use inside the model. Those will probably be adjusted because every year what we do with our financial model is we take actuals, we put the actuals into the model, we enter the new budget into the model, and then we add any additional assumptions that would be happening that we can see coming in the future so that we can really continue. It's a dynamic model. It's not something that we just want to, add figures to and then let it sit. We actually update the model every single year so that we can have really a better look at how that, those next several years are looking inside of that 10-year model.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, I will move on. Okay, here's a snapshot of the projected allocations for the next 8 years. One thing I wanted to point out is this 1.88 decrease being calculated for fiscal year 2031 is due to a sharp drop in estimated debt service figures. We have some debt service numbers starting to fall off around this time frame. However, we're continuously assessing our infrastructure needs and will need to issue debt to address them. So we plan on strategizing our future debt funding to smooth rate impacts over time. So while we hope to smooth this rate, this negative 1.88% will not be a reality at the end of the day, because we will need to issue some debt at some point to address some infrastructure concerns at the plant. But this is just a general look at what we project. And here is a charted version of that information. So the difference between the ending fund balance, this blue line, and the target reserve level represents the balance in the refund reserve. The large dip in the beginning is again going back to that $12.8 million of refund reserve that Santa Rosa refunded. And the partner contribution change from year to year equals estimated net rate increases to meet our target reserve levels. You'll also note, looking at this chart, that in the long term, ending fund balance equals target reserve levels. And that's unique in this enterprise in that we expect these figures to always kind of meet, because we budget the regional enterprise to meet its needs and don't plan on having any excess. So we always want our spending to, we always want our reserve levels to equal our target reserve levels, just because that's the nature of the operation. And then here's a look at our preliminary budget schedule. We have upcoming meetings with this group in March and April, as noted. BPU budget subcommittee, the subcommittee, or the Board of Public Utilities rather, is still working on appointments and the makeup of committees, I believe. So those dates are pending, and we'll update you once we have that information. April 21st is the BPU budget recommendation to City Council. And of particular importance to this group is the City Council meeting on April 25th is when we plan to ask for preliminary approval of the regional budget for the purposes of notifying your agencies of what your regional allocations are for 23-24. And then City Council study sessions in early May and formal budget adoption on June 20th. And with that, we can open it up to more questions if anybody has any.
Any questions or comments from subject members? It looks like Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly. So it looks like under the current model, we're projected to hit zero, or at least at budget overall. by the end of the decade, starting the next, without some changes or additional allocations towards it.
Yes, and keep in mind, this figure doesn't, oh, excuse me. This dotted
Yeah,
line
yeah.
doesn't represent zero. It just represents our target reserve levels. And
Yeah.
so the theory in our regional operation is that we don't carry excess reserves because we're, if we carry a bunch of excess reserves, then in theory, that means we're overcharging you for the cost of operations. The only reason we have funding balance, ending fund balance above target reserve levels is because we're holding that refund reserve for rate smoothing. But the long-term assumption is that we're always budgeting to only hold our target reserve levels, and therefore giving everyone as much access to excess cash as possible for use in your own operation. So that's the theory behind that.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any further questions?
It's like Craig, you have your hand up?
Yeah. Whoops. Okay. You can hear me. So the bottom line, is that what the kind of initial overall rate increase adjustment is looking like, or is this just a part of it? Because I mean, that looks hopeful to us, that we're going from 6 to about 2.9%. Is that what you're indicating the increase in 24 is looking like?
Tentatively, yes. With, you know, I would also say that we're very much still working on this. This is a work in progress. And we do have some upcoming critical infrastructure needs that may have an impact 2 to 5 years out, namely the LTP electrical infrastructure. There's several things that we're planning for CIP wise and assessing and studying at the plant. And so while these are the preliminary numbers, I wouldn't say that that's definitely what it's looking like, because we may have cash impacts by this point in the plan that would change those figures a year or two down the road.
I think also, Craig, this year, the one thing that we don't know yet, but we're starting to get numbers on, which all of you probably are seeing as well, is that we could see definitely 24 be higher because of PG&E costs. We are the largest, pretty much one of the largest users, I think, in all of Northern California of electricity. And if some of those numbers that PG&E is putting out there right now come to fruition, that's going to be probably a significant jump for us. We've heard as much as a 45% rate increase or a 53% rate increase in electricity.
Wow.
We're not at this point planning to budget that much of an increase, but you know, when you're talking about the treatment plant, that is a significant, one of the most significant costs that we have. So we have to keep working towards getting those numbers in order to set budget for this year. And then we'll show it to you. In the model, we're just using the assumption that we showed you, which was, I think, 15% was what we showed you. So you'll get more firm numbers just even by the next round, because we'll have everybody's budget in and we'll have collected some more data on some of those costs that we don't have any control over, unfortunately.
Well, thanks for dampening my hopes.
I'm sorry. I wish it was better. Maybe it is. Maybe, you know, there's been a lot of talk from our politicians in Sacramento saying that they want, you know, those costs being looked into. So maybe it'll be a little bit better than they're putting out.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Mike.
Yeah, a couple questions. One related to this and one more tangentially related to this, since I have Nick and Kimberly on the line. One is, at least for us, we've been seeing essentially I think we've all been seeing that inflation has been running around 7% over the last couple of years or so. And we have been seeing that. Actually, we started to see that going up before I think the general public did, which I'm sure. And I'm just wondering if you have seen, you know, just in looking at your last couple of years, that you've seen just what an impact, my question is, I guess, what's been the impact of inflation on your operational costs?
So I'll jump in. Sorry, Nick. I think the biggest one we're seeing is chemicals. Chemicals have increased significantly. The cost of goods, luckily we usually have agreements in place with vendors to buy and to purchase. And so some of those have been in place from beforehand. One of the biggest costs we saw last year were the purchase of equipment for the old UV system because we needed to stock up on parts. So that was, a pretty big expenditure, and we're just seeing the cost of all of those goods going up.
Right. Us too.
Once again, electricity. This winter, we used a lot of electricity. So when it's bad for us on the water side, when it's dry, it's less expensive at the plant. But when it's wet, it's more expensive at the plant. So,
right.
It's a balancing act. But we definitely, have seen at least this year, not only volume of electricity, but cost of electricity go up for us out there. Yeah. So those are some of the big ones that we're seeing. Chemicals, I think, is one of the ones we've seen the most. And that just had to do with supply chain. When they could charge more, they did. So things were scarce, and we definitely saw that.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's one of the great things about being in both water and wastewater. There's really never a good year for both or a bad year for both. So you can, it depends on what you want to look at. The last question again is tangentially related. I know that the city of Santa Rosa participates in AWWA's utility benchmarking study they do, and we're embarking on a similar, following that and doing the same metrics. And I just wanted to find out who can I best talk to? Who's the best person to talk to at Santa Rosa Water about getting the city's benchmarking numbers?
Oh, we can get that from our asset management group. They put together the benchmarking for us.
Oh, they do? Okay, great.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so if you could get those to me, that would be great. Or if there's someone I can talk to, it would be really helpful.
I think the person who did it is no longer with us. But
you can talk to, we'll put you in touch, Mike, with Lori Urbanik. So.
Oh, Lori. Okay, that would be great. So, okay, that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Ryan, you had a question?
Just a real quick one. So it looks like either in the model or the intentions by the end of the decade are to really get the ratio of your regional debt to sort of pay-go capital to go down, or is that just sort of chopped off on the? Looks like there's an intent to, like if you look at it for now, our regional debt is roughly 2/3 projected by the end of the decade. I just figured, is that like a target, or is that just an effect of something?
Well, when we talk about the overall funding scheme, we don't really target a specific ratio with, of debt versus cash funding. It's basically an ongoing analysis, and we basically do it off of two factors, one being cash flow smoothing and the other one being just the sheer need of timing for cash flows. So for example, we came up to a couple of years ago, realized we were going to need a lot of cash for the UV disinfection replacement project. We went out and got a bond for it. It was a favorable market. And so it was really the potential rate impacts and the cash need, the cash flow requirements that kind of inform that. We're not ever really shooting for a target ratio in any respect, if that makes sense.
It just may end up that way, just for how that's being projected right now. That's just longer term outlook. Okay.
Exactly. It's not a specific strategy in terms of ratios or anything like that. It's just kind of financial sustainability, impacts to rates, and cash flow needs.
Okay, thanks.
Well, and I think, Ryan, Nick mentioned earlier that we know that there's going to be some more debt service that we're going to have to incur. We have, an electrical project that is going to be tens of,
I can only imagine,
millions, right?
Yeah.
And with the cost of things increasing, as I think we've talked about in previous meetings, the UV project that Nick mentioned, was $50 million when we got an estimate, and it came in at 70 million. So, we're seeing significantly increased costs there. And so at some point we'll have to do that. We just haven't added it to the model yet because we need to see more about the projects in order to determine the costs that are going to need to go into the model for that. But we have it set up so that we can add that to the model and that can be distributed in the model as well, so that people can see, what the effects of those are when we get closer to knowing what it's going to be.
Because that is 6-7 years out, so that's pretty tough but it's hard to imagine it going down that much, but yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Not really.
All right, not seeing any. And again, I just want to acknowledge and thank Nick and Kimberly for all the hard work on this and the partners. You had requested that we put together a model, so we've done so, working with our rate consultant. But as caveated, there's a number of things that still fluctuate quite a bit. So hopefully this is a helpful tool going forward. And so we'll be updating it as mentioned and bringing it forward every year. With that, we will go ahead and assuming there's no more questions or comments from SubTAC members, we'll open it up for public comment. And if you wish to make a comment and you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Okay, great. Again, thank you, Nick and Kimberly. And we will now move on to item 5.2. Item 5.2 is a Regional Operations Division update, and Deputy Director Water Reuse Mike Prinz will be making the presentation.
Okay, everyone, just confirm that you can see my screen. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go quickly, probably faster than I want. So if there are gaps that we want to fill in with questions after my presentation or even after the meeting, you can get in touch with me. But to kick it off, this is a picture of the UV project excavation that's going on right now. It's the first phase of mass excavation that I just wanted to whet your appetite. I have a few more photos to show you. That excavation is only the first phase. There will be shoring installed and the excavation will actually wind up being about 12 feet deeper, actually. Let's see, moving on. So Dina, there we go. Okay. Dina is my backup if there's a problem with the presentation today. Topics I want to touch on today as quickly as I can, a recap of 2022. I want to talk about 2023 so far because 2023 has been pretty eventful so far. I'll touch on recycled water storage and the fact that that is related to a discharge event that we went through recently. And then I will touch on the disinfection system upgrade as well. Regarding our agricultural irrigation customer base, 2022 was a very good year, but weather was very favorable. Things were not quite as hot and dry as they could have been, and as we have seen in the past. Irrigation for our ag customer base ended October 12th. We guarantee allotments through September 30th. Overall, our ag customer base used 89% of their 1.27 billion gallon allotment. The highest use was a little over 100 million gallons, but only 74% of the allotment for that particular customer. That customer has a wide range of uses of recycled water, irrigation, pasture vineyard, and they even have a vegetable irrigation lessee, I believe, on their property. Our lowest use was 0%. We have some small hobby farms that we supply recycled water to, but in some cases they didn't use any recycled water. Very small usage, I might add, when they do use water. Regarding our urban recycled water supply and geysers, urban irrigation tapered past October 12th. We still had some dry weather. Rohnert Park's usage was 307 million gallons of a 450 million gallon allotment, so just a little over 2/3. Santa Rosa's urban usage was 31.6 million gallons, which is relatively normal. And then on our geysers contract fulfillment, we hit 91.17%. We need to hit 90% or better Otherwise, there are contractual ramifications that are undesirable. So by hitting near 90%, but above 90%, we maximize water availability for other customers besides Calpine. This is a quick summary of the general trend of geysers deliveries since 2017. Obviously, we've hit the lowest of those years, and in some cases, we've hit above 100%, as was the case in 2017. Shifting to 2023, we did experience some pretty significant flooding at the plant. It's not as bad, or it was not as bad as it has been, such as 2006, which was quite bad. But nonetheless, Laguna de Santa Rosa water levels were high enough to where we needed to rely on some temporary flood protection measures. This is a view more or less looking north. And you can see the Laguna in the foreground. There's actually a truck fording floodwaters after having gone over the bridge of the Laguna. And you can see the main entrance of the plant is inundated, as are other areas of the plant. I have a few more photos of that. This is a different perspective, almost the opposite perspective, that shows how flooding creeps into the plant. I'm going to zoom in on this in a little bit, but overall, this is not as bad as we have seen, but you can't tell for sure how bad things are going to get. So you have to prepare for the worst when you see flooding potential increasing. We protect certain portions of the plant with temporary flood walls, these orange water bladders, if you will, that tie into an array of concrete blocks that are installed in various ways throughout the plant to protect a region of the plant that is low-lying and has a lot of electrical equipment. When flood waters look like they're going to be approaching the plant, we do deploy these temporary flood barriers over roads that are normally used for access. That's what they look like when they're inflated, if you will, or filled with water. We do use recycled water for that, by the way. And they do work. This is a shot showing it, a Tiger Dam, as they're referred to. It's a name brand, holding water back, flood water back. The water that you see on the other side of the berm is storm water that accumulates in that area because we have to block storm drains. Otherwise, you would get backflow from the Laguna into the plant, into protected areas. So stormwater doesn't have anywhere to go, but it's much less than the flood water would be impacting. I'll also point out, this is a relatively strategic photo because the tan boxy looking infrastructure behind the yield sign is a load center. It's electrical equipment that we're trying to protect. It has a low capacity flood wall, concrete flood wall around it, but that's been deemed to be insufficient, and it isn't actually as useful as the system that we have in place outside of it. But we need to protect electrical equipment for a variety of obvious reasons. Moving on, that same Tiger Dam, just a broader perspective from a drone shot that was taken, showing how it is actually making a difference there at the plant. Shifting gears into recycled water storage, the red curve, if you will, it's kind of a irregular curve, but that shows 2023, and I should say water years since October and into the calendar year 2023. Recycled water storage levels, they're quite high. We're actually breaking records right now. That's attributable to the array of atmospheric river related storms that came through in January. The black trend is last year's trend. So you can see we're substantially higher. And the other lines, I won't spend time discussing, but I can answer questions about those if needed. The fact is, though, right now, plant flows are in the vicinity of 20 million gallons a day. And geysers flows are in the vicinity of 18 million gallons a day. So we're in kind of a sweet spot right now. Our recycled water storage levels are high. We do not have a discharge window of opportunity because there's no rain. We need rain to elevate creek flows to facilitate a discharge. But the benefit of not having rain is plant flows are not as high, so storage levels don't climb as much. So we're going to see how things go, but if the rains come back, I would want significant rains to allow us to have a discharge opportunity. I do not want light rains because those will increase plant flows and storage levels, but will more than likely not facilitate a discharge. So we're in kind of a holding pattern right now as far as storage levels are concerned. We did initiate and conduct a discharge operation between January 18th and the 26th. It's the first discharge we've done in a while. This chart is just to show you, this photo is just to show you the relative location. The red circle is Delta Pond. That's our primary discharge location. The purple circle is where LTP is located. And just for orientation, the blue line is Highway 12, and the yellow circle is where the utilities offices are, and the utility field offices at 69 Stony Circle. Delta Pond is about 6 miles from LTP. And our discharge was just under 87 million gallons, which is a relatively small discharge. The discharge goes through an array of duckbill diffusers in the bottom of Santa Rosa Creek. It was constructed a number of years ago. This is a shot of those duckbill diffusers and then the interior of the manifold that they are attached to. And this is a screenshot of a great video that was taken by one of our reclamation team members. But you can see the disturbance at the surface of Santa Rosa Creek in the photo, proving that our discharge manifolds are working as intended. They had been blocked by some gravel and deposition in the creek for quite a while, and that was cleaned off this past summer. I think I may have shown you photos of that operation. So we benefited significantly from getting that operation done. Historical discharge trend back to 2010 shows that most years we don't discharge, but in some years we'll discharge as much as 1.2 billion gallons. I want to clarify that our maximum storage capacity is in the vicinity of 1.4 billion gallons. So 1.2 billion gallon discharge, as was done in 2016, 2017, that was a very significant discharge. The discharge that we've done so far obviously is going to register very low on this scale. But we're not out of the year yet, so we're not showing that total yet. But generally speaking, infrequent discharges, sometimes significant, but often zero. Pine Flat Road is an important road to us because we have the geysers pump stations, 3 of 4 geysers pump stations on Pine Flat Road. And as you can see from the photo on the screen right now, there were some pretty significant events, shall we say, on Pine Flat Road. The biggest boulder in this photo is probably tens of tons. Quite frankly, it's bigger than a full-size pickup. And the road was completely blocked for a while. Sonoma County did get some crews out to clear that so we could get a lane open fairly quickly. But it's significant because you can see where the yellow symbol is, the yellow flash symbol is roughly where this occurred. And we have 3 pump stations, all similar capacity in terms of pressure and flow, that we have to access to make adjustments and do maintenance and sometimes address problems on an urgent basis. So having a problem on Pine Flat Road, such as occurred earlier in January, can be very significant. I will also say that right now is a very sensitive time in terms of geysers operation on an annual basis, because we are relying on 100% of our pump station capacity. All 5 of 5 pumps at each pump station are running at full output right now. Update about UV construction. A lot of details on this slide. I'm just going to touch on a few. The groundbreaking did happen on the 26th. I think some of you, October 26th, that is. I think some of you were in attendance. We've rerouted traffic at the plant to facilitate construction. We've done some relocation of some features at the plant, underground and above ground. And next up, we're going to be finishing the dewatering system, relocating our hypochlorite facility, and continuing with the mass excavation. This is an overview of the overall project that includes a purple line, which is a very significant diversion pipeline to retreat water if there's a problem with the system. That pipeline is 42 inches in diameter, and it's several $1 million worth of scope in the project. Here's kind of a great drone photo of the groundbreaking ceremony with a whole bunch of people. Some of you, I think, even in the photograph. It's a very fond memory for me. And then here's a picture that was just taken the other day from a drone showing the mass excavation starting for the main part of the facility in the green box there. The yellow box shows the existing hypochlorite facility where it will be demoed and then rebuilt in where the red box is. The red box is the new hypochlorite facility footprint. So that's it. Pretty fast, maybe too fast, but I think we're short on time. Are there questions that I might be able to answer? And if we don't have time, you can always follow up with me after the meeting as well.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any questions or comments from the subtech? All right. Oh, Mike, do you have a question?
I don't.
No. Okay.
No,
Seeing none.
thanks for the presentation.
You bet.
All right, seeing none, thank you, Mike. And we'll now open up for public comments on item 5.2. If you wish to make a comment and you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are on the phone, dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Deputy Director Prinz. We will now move on to item 5.3, and that is our environmental services update. And our Deputy Director of Environmental Services, Sean McNeil, will be making the presentation. Don't see Sean. Did we lose Sean? Oh, there he is.
Oh, I'm here. You know, when I get promoted, everything goes dark for me. So thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. Thank you, Director Burke, members of the subTAC. I'm excited to be here today to share with you rather briefly some updates in the Environmental Services Division. As seeing we were running long on time, I cut out a little bit of the presentation, which I can come back next time and update you on, but I'm going to just focus on our latest sampling of PFAS, give a little overview of what PFAS is and what it means to the wastewater industry, and then a little bit about phosphorus, our phosphorus compliance. Because as Nick talked about in his presentation, a big component of our expenses that spike are related to our phosphorus compliance. So PFAS chemicals are manufactured chemicals that consist of fluorinated carbon chains. These are used in food containers, packaging, carpets, clothing, paint, sealants, electronics and coatings, and firefighting foams. Amongst many other industrial uses as well, but these are widely used in our household products, as well as the clothing and carpets that we have. It's become the big topic at many conferences and journals related to wastewater, and it seems to be one of the biggest issues that we're facing. Primarily, these PFAS compounds have been shown to bioaccumulate in animals and people, which of course are a subset of animals. And it's found in every surface water body. So there's been our use of PFAS has led to atmospheric deposition, as well as groundwater and as I mentioned, in animals and humans. And that the city is involved in 2 different studies in PFAS, looking at PFAS in wastewater. Why we started learning about this, the state board issued Water Quality Order 2020 -00D15 DWQ in July 9th of 2020, required the sampling of 31 separate PFAS compounds. I want to make it clear there are thousands of compounds. It's just these 31 that we have methods for detecting that have been approved for looking at in their research methods for wastewater. And we were required to do quarterly sampling of our influent and effluent and biosolids, as well as a one-time sampling of our groundwater wells in areas where we have recycled water and areas where we use biosolids for application. Here's our sampling locations at the plant. We have our influent right over here. Our biosolids is sampled right here, and then our effluent. So those 3 samples were all within our plant that we did quarterly. And I will share some of that data after we look at our other sample locations. So looking in Santa Rosa Plain, in the northern part here, this is Delta Pond. This is Santa Rosa Creek running there. This is our irrigation study site. We have monitoring wells where we're applying irrigation both in up gradient. So on the groundwater up gradient portion of the site. So presuming that it's an area that's free of interference with our recycled water applications, and then another well downstream. And I'll zoom these up and you can see, so here's our up gradient site. This is our down gradient site. And so we can compare the input of PFAS there. And then here's our biosolids application site. We actually have 4 monitoring wells on this site. Monitoring 103 is our upstream, our up gradient site, and 101 is our down gradient site. And then we have this 102 well, which is mid gradient as well. And this 115 is an alternate up gradient site, but it was not used in our analysis. So here's the data. So there's some funny trends. These trends are seen throughout the wastewater industry. Influent is the blue bars and effluent is the orange bars. And then on the y-axis, we have the amount of total PFAS. And this is in nanograms per liter, which is parts per trillion. I will make sure to update you because when we look at biosolids, it's a different, we do it in parts per billion. But you can see here that we have more in our effluent than we do our influent. This is supported through many wastewater treatment plants and is assumed to be that there's a breakdown of some of these chemicals that aren't the 31 that we're testing for, that then as they go through the process, they take the form of the chemicals that we are testing. So we are not necessarily making PFAS, we're breaking down ones that aren't a part of that 31. So, and then we have our biosolids, and this is, as I mentioned, this is in parts per billion, which is nanograms per gram on the y-axis. So these values are a lot higher than the water values that I shared with you by an order of 1,000. And so the other thing that you can see in both of these graphs is that there does seem to be some level of seasonality with a greater amount of PFAS in our plant and biosolids in the winter compared to spring and summer. So when we look at our irrigated lands, our upgradient site, relatively low. These are in parts per trillion, relatively low in the upgradient, but not zero. And in the downgradient monitoring wells, it was slightly elevated, but it's only one data point, so it's hard to make any comparison, but it's relatively low. Compare that to the biosolids. This graph is a little bit different. So it's a stacked bar graph looking at all of the different constituents that we did detect of those 31 that we were monitoring. And I'm showing you the stacked bar graph, which is a little more complicated for these wells because the largest indicator of PFAS is this one chemical, which is the gray bar here, which is PFBS. And so this is something that was a little alarming when we got our first initial data, which is monitoring well 101, our down gradient, and 103, our up gradient site. So we decided to do a second sampling in July. So this occurred in the winter. We did a second sampling in July, and the monitoring well 101 decreased in the summer months, stayed relatively same in the up gradient. And then we added that mid gradient well to that second sampling. And you can see it's an intermediary between the two. So this is something that we're planning to look into more. And we're working with biosolids support throughout the state. And it's another reason why we're involved in those research studies. So we could get a better handle on what are we seeing here, what are the potential sources of this, and what we might be able to do to prevent further degradation of this source. And so this is that data showing you the map and locations. So our PFAS summary is that the PFAS concentrations increase in the winter months. There's no significant trend of PFAS in our irrigated lands, and there's some elevated PFAS in monitoring wells in areas of biosolids land application. We don't know the source of that. Sources of PFAS in our wastewater, we're beginning to start looking at this. We know from research that there's a background that's just coming from our residential uses, primarily through laundry and our kitchen sinks from our cooking products. Then we get landfill leachate at the wastewater is another thing that we're looking at. Seems to be one of the larger sources of PFAS into our system, and that there might be, when looking at groundwater, there might have been legacy sources that we no longer have from our industries. These were not sampled because they were not EPA regulated. So we didn't sample these at our industries. So there could have been some legacy sources that we no longer have driving some of these groundwater issues that we're seeing in our biosolids. So with that, I'm going to transition rather quickly over to our phosphorus compliance. And so we've developed a phosphorus credit tracking database, as I've reported in previous meetings. We have moved from the nutrient offset program to the water quality trading framework. There's a different calculation of credits, and there was a need for us to bring credits from the nutrient offset program into our water quality trading program. We currently, under the water quality trading program, have 13,736 credits available. Our database can track all of the credits that are developed, purchased, sold, and used to offset a discharge. We get a unique identifier with each credit. So it allows us to have the control of these as if they were financial trades as well. So we know how much we have in our banks, how much we're generating, and how much we can sell, purchase, or develop. We did complete a phosphorus trading agreement with the town of Windsor, giving the city and the town options to buy or sell credits. Just as a reminder, some of these credits do expire. So this gives us greater flexibility in our ability to use all the credits that we've developed. And the terms of this agreement stipulate that the cost to develop the credits plus a 20% markup for any handling fees to cover any handling of those credits is how that will work. Right now, the town of Windsor does not have any credits. So at this point, we would be looking at selling credits to them. And that we are in the process of working on a new phosphorus removal project for Colgan Creek restoration from Todd Road to Yana Road, working with Sonoma Water on that project. So the phosphorus accounting, because we did start a discharge this year so far, in doing our analysis, our average concentration of phosphorus in our discharge pond was 2.0 milligrams per liter. The amount we discharged was 86.9 million gallons so far. And then our phosphorus mass loading so far is 1,449 pounds, much less than the credits that we have. And in working with the town of Windsor, it's looking like they have been doing a discharge, and they're looking to purchase anywhere from 500 to 1,000 credits. And we can do that true up at the end of discharge season to meet our permit compliance as well as theirs. And then just briefly, this is the location of the Colgan Creek Restoration Project. It's near the plant, will provide additional flood capacity as we remove a bunch of legacy sediments from this section, and then increase water quality by doing habitat restoration in that reach. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. Any questions or comments from subtech members? All right, seeing none. Again, thank you, Sean, for that presentation. I'll open it up for public comment. So if you are on Zoom and you wish to make a comment on item 5.3, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, please dial *9. And Secretary Manis, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Sean. And with that, we'll move to our last item. Item 5.4 is going to be a update on Santa Rosa's Our Water Future Water Supply Alternatives Plan, and Colin Close, Senior Water Resources Planner, will be making the presentation.
There we go. Let me start my video as well. Thank you very much, Director Burke. I will bring up the presentation. Did I lose? Yes, I lost that. Let me try one more time. Apologies for that. Let's see if we can get that to share. Excellent. Thank you again. I'll give a brief update on the Water Supply Alternatives Plan. I know that a couple of members are participating in this, so I don't want to belabor it too much, and I can provide additional information offline if anyone needs more than is provided today. The purpose, of course, is to increase our locally owned and operated water supplies so that we can mitigate the impacts of any shortages that Sonoma Water might experience, because about 93% of our potable supply comes from them. So we're looking at a wide range of supply options, studying all of those, and then we'll develop a plan, looking at the most feasible options for increasing our supplies over time. To date, there have been quite a few meetings. This project, by design, is soliciting input from a wide range of interests. So we've had 2 working sessions with our internal water team interdisciplinary group, 2 community webinars that are 2 hours each, 2 stakeholder group meetings. These working sessions included a couple of folks here from the subTAC, as well as folks from across Santa Rosa, leaders in a wide range of industries and interests. We held a study session with our Board of Public Utilities, and of course, our consulting team has been helping all along to refine information and lead these meetings and provide technical assistance with this. So as I said, quite a bit of input received to date. Some of the key themes from the groups that we've worked with is we need to make sure that there's a focus on equity. So for example, making sure that we don't inadvertently impact vulnerable communities, for example, by locating a facility in an area that would disrupt quality of life in some way in one neighborhood versus another. We have to look at the cost effectiveness of supply options, also community impacts. So will this actually help make sure that our community is less burdened during droughts in terms of their conservation, the impacts on the rates they pay, that sort of thing. And then obviously the whole point of this project is to have greater independence from Sonoma Water so that we are more resilient, and also so that more water is left in Lake Sonoma for the use of all of our regional partners. So in terms of the timeline, that first block of work has been completed. All of that work to establish our goals, our criteria, the study methodology, the water supply options that would be studied, all of that has been completed, and the feasibility study is now underway. The water supply resiliency goal, with all of the input that we received, has been refined to this: to diversify and increase our supplies, to reduce our dependence on Sonoma Water, particularly during any water shortages or disruptions that Sonoma Water might experience. Volumetrically, we're looking at 30% of the city's water demand, so being able to provide that ourselves. During a severe drought, that would reduce the impact significantly so that we can provide 30% of demand. In 2045, when we look at our projected demands, that volume would be about 7,500 acre feet that we would produce ourselves. If there were a natural disaster, some sort of short-term disruption in the ability of Sonoma Water to provide water to us, that would provide about 9 million gallons per day. That would reach about half of our normal indoor domestic demand. So we'd be providing about 19 gallons per person per day or so, and would also provide water for commercial, industrial, institutional, and of course for health and safety. So we would be able to provide whatever was needed for fire protection, hospitals, those would be prioritized. When we have normal water years, the peak day demand, we'd be able to shave off about 9 million gallons per day. So again, all of this works to support Santa Rosa's independence and resilience, protect the interests and concerns of our customers, but also it leaves more water in Lake Sonoma. So we're looking at a wide range of options for study. I'll go over those in a moment, but the study is going to look at describing the sources, getting a sense of how much water they would provide, what limits there might be. There may be seasonal limits, or there may be some sort of regulatory limits on that supply, describing those. Looking at proposed locations, trying to ground these in real locations so that to the greatest extent possible, this is an assessment, although very high level, of real projects. Look at what needs to be constructed, consider all the other options and considerations that need to be taken into account. So these are the areas that we're looking at with this study for groundwater, looking at not only our typical groundwater extraction wells, but aquifer storage and recovery, considering purified recycled, both direct and indirect, considering non-potable recycled, so expanding, for example, expanding storage so that we can store more winter water and potentially have it available for use during the summer for customers. Desalination, considering potentially brackish and ocean desal, and then looking at surface and stormwater. Could we capture that flow from creeks or from the laguna, from Sonoma water and Russian River, and inject it, store it above ground, looking at those options, and then targeted efficiency programs that would have very aggressive incentives that go well beyond our cost benefit analysis in order to reduce demand as a way of providing a lower demand, decreasing the need for additional supply. So I won't go into detail about those, but just that's a very high level view of the kinds of options that we're considering. And you'll see that there are regional as well as city projects that we would be considering in this study. And just again, as a reminder, this is sort of a class 5 level study. So this is very high level. So what we're going to end up with is not project specific plans and specs that we go out and implement, but rather how do we compare one project against another? And then if we do capital projects in the future, of course, all of those would go through a CEQA process, a budgeting process, all of that sort of thing. So this is very high level. So the evaluation criteria, we started with 16 criteria, and through all of the input that we received from all of our stakeholders and interest groups, we've condensed these down. And so you can see that cost effectiveness is important. Scalability, that's not only how much water the project would provide as built, but does it have the ability to scale up and scale down as needed? Is it resilient? Will future drought or regulations remove that as an option? We need to consider that. What disproportionate impacts could have on vulnerable communities. The environmental performance is over and above the CEQA process. That is, would this in fact have some sort of environmental benefit or environmental impact in some way that isn't considered in CEQA, but we need to keep in mind. Legal permitting and regulatory, of course, and then is it city controlled? Is it interagency coordination? Of course, city controlled is going to rate a little higher because it's within our control. There are some risks with interagency coordination. It takes time, it takes effort. Folks can, in working out those agreements, it's a lot more work to do. And then multi-benefit. So for example, if we do stormwater capture, are we also addressing flood control issues? So what are the multiple benefits of projects? The methodology is to look at all of those supply options that I showed before and do a high-level assessment of cost effectiveness and scalability. Some projects are going to fall out, we know that. But that will at least let us document why those are falling out. If they're not at least on a high level, cost-effective and scalable, we need to remove those. And then we'll have a shorter list of options for a very detailed analysis. And that detailed analysis is going through an assessment based on all of the criterion and then assigning weight to those criterion. So high level, and then short list, and then detailed analysis. When we look at the detailed analysis, these are the same criterion that I showed before, but these would be then weighted to some degree. So what Woodard and Curran is currently working on is a matrix that will have numeric values, and the higher something scores, the better the project is. So we're going to be looking at perhaps anywhere from 3 to 5 metrics for every one of these, and then their score would be weighted to some degree to help us compare these projects against each other. Just to let you know the next steps, this is where we are today. The supply goals, the supply options, and the criteria and methods have been developed, and now the study is underway. We're going to bring back our key stakeholders, the water team, the stakeholder group, and the community in May to look at the study results, the draft findings, take that input, that'll get finalized. And then Woodard and Curran will develop synopsis of portfolio. So they're going to develop some options of mixes of water supplies that could help us reach our goal. Those will be brought back to folks for review in June and July. And then we will also be looking at the draft plan in July. And then in September, we'll have the public review draft ready. That'll be shown to BPU and City Council, and then we'll finalize that report, present it to BPU and Council in October. And we are currently on track. We are still on schedule as defined. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Great, thank you, Colin. Any questions or comments from subTAC members?
Yeah, Colin, real quick, would you mind putting up the slide showing the alternatives you're looking at?
You bet. Let me just share my screen. And I think you meant this slide. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay, terrific. And I can provide, through the secretary, I can provide a 4-page handout that has all of the study criteria in it. So it includes the goal, the supply options, the criteria, and the methodology. It's a nice 4-page summary. So I'll be happy to provide that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent, happy to help.
Craig, looks like you have a question as well.
Yeah, so as this group may recall, I was actually assigned to represent our group at the stakeholder meetings. So I attended the 2 stakeholder meetings and was impressed by the variety of interests and how it was so well conducted by the consultant team and Colin. So the general scenario was we were separated out into groups around each table and provided questions to kind of tease out what our preferences were with this group of options. And I was probably the most technically astute person on there, and that was kind of refreshing to see this input from a big variety of different interest groups. And so we saw the rates become a very high priority. Equity, I kind of I was on the other side of that, going thinking with the engineering part of my brain, like, how is this going to provide us more supply? But I kind of became more aware of what that importance was. So I just wanted to recap. You see purified recycled water is in play, as well as the non-potable recycled water. And then as far as the impacts to the partners, as these actually come about in the plan, is yet to be seen. But I think if those options are realized, it could put, we would have a role in that. So very, very aware of our perspective at these stakeholder meetings, and I look forward to seeing the draft report. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that synopsis. And we and the whole project team has been, I would say, actually floored by the quality of the questions and the input, particularly from the stakeholders, but also the community as well. And the commitment and the engagement, it's really been very, very impressive to us and very helpful. We can look at it technically, we can look at it as a water provider, but to understand the concerns and interests of our community, from business, construction, service agencies, et cetera, it really makes a difference for us. So we really appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments from Subtech members? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation, Colin. And before you go, we'll open it up to public comment for item 5.4. If you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand on Zoom, or if you're on the phone, dial *9. Secretary Manis, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
All right, great. So with that, thank you all. We are adjourned. And just a reminder that likely going forward, all meetings will be in person at the Subtech.
And Jennifer, likely going forward, Emma Walton may be your new representative for South Park.
Well, that would be excellent.
Yeah, I think she may have a little bit of knowledge about the treatment plant and the system.
Well, thank you, Mike. And if you do want to make that official change, please just let us know.
Okay.
And if you do, thank you for all of your service on this board over the years.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.